that topic this evening. Few things to mention before I introduce him. You probably have a flyer, and there'll be some others available to you. We've added a new segment of the Healthy Living series, and it's with Susan Johnson, who's Regional Director of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Region 10, which is this region, obviously, that encompasses Alaska. And it's the new health insurance marketplace in you. And if you've been a regular here, like some hecklers in the front rows, you know that this health insurance question is one that's drawn a lot of attention and concern. So it's a perfect episode to end the Healthy Living series on. Other events taking place this week you might be interested in. Of course, at the Botanical Gardens down there, great music on Thursday evenings at 7 o'clock. Leighton will perform this week. And then there's a wonderful movie, if you're not into music, that's playing right here in this theater at 7 o'clock. It's called The Road Taken, which looks at the experience of black porters that worked on the Canadian Railroad during the 1900s through 1960s. So an interesting documentary, I think. And, of course, tomorrow night, Professor Derek Burleson from the English department here is going to talk about Alaska's unacknowledged legislators. But you have to sign a form that you won't talk about them after you leave tomorrow night. So let me welcome Dr. Joshua Sonkiss. He's a medical doctor who specializes in the diagnosis and treatment of mental illness, like depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. He earned his medical degree at McGill University in Canada and then completed his psychiatric residency at the University of Utah. He is medical director of the Inpatient Behavioral Health Unit at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital and also provides outpatient treatment to residents of the North Slope. And along with seeing patients, he also participates in clinical teaching, peer education, research, and mental health advocacy. So except for a brief 10-year period, he's been here in Alaska since 1989. Please welcome Dr. Sonkiss.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. Is there a way that we could dim the lights a little bit, or is this visible to everyone?
I think it's pretty visible.
Yeah. So the answer's no.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. Sounds good. Well, thanks for coming. I'm going to talk about mental illness and violence, obviously. And I may interact with you, the audience, a little bit this evening, but I'm going to ask you to reserve questions for the end so that I can get through all of the important points that I have to share with you today. One of the main reasons that I'm here tonight, and presumably that you're here tonight, is because of headlines like these. I think we're all too familiar with these kinds of headlines that are popping up. It seems like on a weekly basis there's a mass shooting, someone goes on a homicidal, suicidal rampage, and it ends up in the paper, and we're all left with the big question, why? That is a really, really complicated question with many different possible answers, and so I will try to answer that as well as I can tonight. I think we'll all still have questions at the end. So during this discussion, I'm going to explain who I am and what I do, and our MC has already mostly done that for me. I'm going to define mental illness just so that we can be clear and all agree on what we're talking about. I'm going to review facts about mental illness, about violence committed by people who have mental illness. I'm going to describe different types of violence because there are all different kinds, and some are related to mental illness and some are not. I'm going to talk about the role of substance abuse, things like alcohol and drugs that have a profound effect on violence risk. I'm going to explain the basics of violence risk assessment as it is carried out by professionals. And then finally, in a related discussion, I'm going to talk about methods of reducing violence risk. And that seems like a lot. There will be some disturbing images in this presentation, nothing worse than you would see on primetime television, but for anyone who is likely to be offended by that, I would ask you to step out now. That won't begin for a few slides, and I am serious about that. I don't want you to be offended by anything that I show, so I want to give you that opportunity to step out, if you would like.
Can you tell us when to close our eyes?
I'll try to remember which slide number it is that begins. So you've heard all of my qualifications already. I just want to emphasize that I'm not a psychologist. I'm a medical doctor with training in the diagnosis and treatment of mental illness. So there is some overlap with psychologists. I expect there may be one or two in the audience tonight. There's a little bit of a different, there are some differences in training, and there's a little bit of a difference in focus. And when I added up the number of hours I have of evaluating and treating patients in different kinds of settings, I was actually kind of shocked. Thought I should take more vacations, but I probably won't. So what do I do at work? This is really all designed to tell you why you should be listening to me tonight, because I could be just anybody. So what I do is I examine patients. That's a physical and a psychiatric examination. I review medical records from other doctors and other kinds of healthcare personnel who create medical records. I interview third parties to get different perspectives on patients. I order and interpret laboratory and radiographic and psychological tests. Prescribe and monitor the effects of medications, and I think that's the one that psychiatrists are best known for doing, but as you can see, there are other things that we do as well. I do a lot of collaboration with physicians in other medical specialties. I couldn't do very much or very well if I wasn't able to collaborate with other physicians. And a big part of what psychiatrists do is evaluate and manage violence risk, and it wasn't always so. That's really a duty that was imposed on psychiatrists and other mental health professionals, almost foisted on us, as some might say, by the courts. And it's become a cultural and a legal expectation that psychiatrists and other mental health care professionals evaluate and manage violence risk. And if we don't do that, there are consequences. Consequences to you, the general public, and consequences to us as well, of course. Faintly in the background, you can see the outlines of a well-known painting by Tony Robert-Fleury of Dr. Philippe Pinel cutting the chains from the mentally ill in one of France's very most horrible asylums back in 1795. And so that is, I think, that's my aspiration, is to be freeing people from the chains of illness. I hope that I do that to some extent. So what is a mental illness? Well, a mental illness, simply put, is and by the way, a mental illness is also known as a mental disorder. They're the same. In practical terms, you can have academic arguments about when to use one term over the other, but they're the same. Mental illnesses are disturbances of thinking, feeling, and behavior that affect people's ability to lead productive and satisfying lives. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. And that can take many, many different forms. Whoops. That wasn't supposed to happen there. And this is, of course, Munch's The Scream in the background here. Now, I feel like I need to divert a little bit and talk about the many people who believe mental illnesses are just made up, that they're not real, that psychiatrists and other mental health care professionals kind of invent diagnoses so that we can charge people money and take their rights away. And so this slide in front of you now refers to Dr. Thomas Sass's famous 1961 publication, The Myth of Mental Illness, in which he propounded his theory that really mental illness just represents the diagnoses that psychiatrists make are really just deviations from social norms, arbitrary social norms that vary across different cultures, and we make these arbitrary distinctions mostly for the purpose of social control. So in other words, you're going to behave. And clearly there is some subjectivity in diagnosing mental illnesses. I don't think there's any argument there. You certainly won't get any argument from me. But in the same way that at some point you have to draw the line, where is blood sugar high enough to diagnose diabetes? Where is blood pressure high enough to diagnose hypertension? Somebody has to draw the line somewhere, and in the same way, we have to draw a line, where does behavior and thinking and feeling, where do those things become so far from accepted norms and so impairing that we're going to call them a disease? This idea that mental health or that mental illness is made up has really taken off in the last 50, 60 years, and this is an exhibit, a protest at a major psychiatric conference within the past year or so, and these folks have gone so far as to say that psychiatrists are out there killing patients with their drugs. I don't know why they never go after the oncologists or the intensive care specialists who have a lot of bad outcomes, not their fault. They always go after psychiatrists, so I don't know who this guy is standing there, but he's taking a big risk. The thing is that if you look at the effects of mental illness, those are real. And so here's where the slides are going to get a little bit maybe disturbing for those of you who are sensitive to those things. This is kind of a big one that I don't think requires a whole lot of explanation. And I'll talk a lot about this in a few minutes. Suicide is a very common, unfortunately, and tragic outcome of mental illness. That's not made up. And the pain that it causes to the people left behind is not made up. And probably there are people in this room who have been touched by this. This is a picture of a hoarder's house. This is a home that has become unlivable, and the occupant is trapped by his or her inability to throw out junk. And it just piles higher and higher and becomes a health hazard. And I've seen people die from complications of hoarding. This is a person who has delusional parasitosis, which is it's a false but unshakable belief that is fueled by unusual physical sensations like tingling, itching, a creepy crawly feeling. It's an unshakable belief that your body is infested with parasites. And this person was so absolutely convinced that she was full of parasites and absolutely convinced that her doctors were wrong when they told her there was nothing to be found, that she picked away half of her nose and part of her cheek, and it's covered with scar tissue. She's become grossly disfigured with abscesses, and her lower lip is missing and replaced by suppurating sores. So these are the effects of mental illness. And if anyone wants to argue whether mental illness is real or not, this is my answer to them. And what I like to say is that mental illness is like gravity. You can't see it. It's poorly understood, but its effects are very real and sometimes devastating, as the pilot and passenger in this aircraft learned the hard way. They actually survived remarkably. So now I'd like to hear from you. How many of you believe that violence and mental illness are inseparable? You can raise your hand. So we've got at least one who has the, thank you for having the gumption to raise your hand. I'm going to challenge that a little bit, but first I want to point out in the background, you can see the faint outlines of another painting. This is the trial of George Jacobs of Salem for witchcraft from 1855. And you'll see why that, you'll understand why I put that painting in the background in a little bit. Studies show most Americans believe that violence and mental illness are inseparable. And I would say, yeah, that's true, but only because violence and humanity are inseparable. So in the Venn diagram of violence, mental illness, and humanity, the violence and mental illness are included in the humanity, and people are violent. So I'll get to why that's an important distinction in a bit. The same study here showed that 50% of Americans believe people with serious mental illness, so not just an anxiety disorder, maybe afraid to go to school or afraid of public speaking, but something serious like schizophrenia or a serious bipolar disorder. 50% of Americans believe those people are more dangerous than members of the general population. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that that's not true. It is technically true, but it's true in the same way that driving a Ford Fiesta is more dangerous than driving an SUV. It's a little bit more dangerous. Maybe I should say a sports car. Driving a sports car is more dangerous than driving an SUV because if you get hit, there's less protection. So it's more dangerous, but is that going to stop you from driving a sports car? Probably not for most people. So the difference is much less than most people think. More concerning to me, because I care about my patients and the lives that they lead, is that 70% of Americans, which is a huge majority, say that they are unwilling to have a person with a serious mental illness as a coworker or a neighbor. And that is disappointing. And I'll get to why. So, first I'm going to answer the question, why do people believe that? Well, I think that the media bears some of the blame because of headlines like this. This is the New York Daily News from November 19, 1999. And there was some bad stuff that happened in the street. So this is the headline that came out. And unfortunately, this newspaper article and its title are kind of emblematic of the caricaturing that goes on in the media. First, selecting out very dramatic events, widely publicizing them using terms that are sensationalist and confusing. So these news articles, in addition to being flamboyant, tend to propagate confusion over words. So for example, crazy. Does crazy mean mentally ill, or does crazy mean outrageous and unthinkable? The same thing with mad. You hear about madmen, you read about madmen in the paper. Well, does mad mean mentally ill, or does mad mean angry? What about psychopaths? We hear about psychopaths. Sounds like psychotic, right? And we know schizophrenic people are psychotic. So schizophrenic people must be psychopathic killers. But in fact, psychopathy and psychosis are completely different, even though they share the same root. So these are kind of some of the problems that emerge when we get most of our information from the media. And it's not as if people should be expected to get their information anywhere else. It's just that we tend to develop biases depending on what we read. So the next why is, why should anybody care about any of this? And I think that the reason is that mental illness is very common. In the same way that blood pressure affects about a third of adult Americans, mental illnesses of various kinds, they're similarly prevalent. So 25% of Americans will have depression at some time in their life. It doesn't mean that 25% out of every 100 people at any given time are depressed, clinically depressed, but it means that 25 of them at some point in their lives will become depressed. Same with anxiety disorders, 1%-ish for schizophrenia, about the same for bipolar disorder, about 15 or 20% for characterological disorders, personality disorders. So really that's a lot of people. So when we're looking for somebody to blame for mass shootings, and we want to blame people that have mental illness, we're really blaming our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, and often ourselves. And I don't think that that's a good idea. So in this slide, I've quoted the author, the cartoonist that made Pogo, that we've met the enemy and he is us. Because when we're talking about the mentally ill, there is no family that I've ever encountered that doesn't have some mental illness somewhere. And the crowd in the background is just an illustration that mental illness is everywhere, just like every other kind of illness is everywhere. Now, having said all that, there is one kind of violence for which mental illness is almost exclusively responsible. And that is self-directed violence.
Sorry.
Oh, this is good. This is actually really good. Thank you. So here is a painting from 18-something. I've lost the date, but a painting of a suicide, just to illustrate what we're talking about. Now, self-directed violence includes several different categories. One is completed suicide, which I've already alluded to. Another is suicide attempts, and studies show that for every completed suicide, there are about 10 or 11 attempts. So there's a lot of suicide attempting going on in the world that you never hear about. There's also self-harm behavior, including cutting, burning, headbanging, and so-called suicidal gestures, which are sometimes called cries for help. So lots of different ways to hurt yourself, and almost all of them due to mental illness. Suicide, I think, is arguably the worst. It is the 10th most common cause of death in the United States. And even more remarkable than that, if you think of all the ways to get killed, suicide is the 3rd most common cause of injury-related death. So what does that number mean? Well, it means that for all of you who buckle your seatbelts and encourage your friends and family to do so, everyone is more likely to die of suicide than they are in a car accident. And I think that is just a remarkable statistic. Those are statistics that actually apply to the lower 48. And as some of you no doubt know, they're much, much worse in Alaska. Alaska, according to these statistics here from 2010, this is the number of suicide deaths per 100,000 by state. Alaska has 164, and the rate is 23.1 per 100,000. So we are about double the lower 48 in this study. There are other studies that range up to 4 times the rate in the lower 48, and a few in the villages that go up to 10. So Alaska has a terrible suicide problem, but we're still behind Wyoming. Now, I think what everybody really came here to hear about is violence toward others. So let's talk about what that is. First of all, the worst, the most common, and the most extensive and devastating violence toward others is political violence. That's well known and accepted. And other than just briefly noting that that's where most of the violence in the world originates, is in things like wars and genocide, I'm not really going to talk about that. We're really here to talk about community violence today. So it's defined by the Department of Justice as murder, rape, sexual assault, robbery, and assault. And then there are other similar definitions from the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. So those are the things that we're really talking about here. And so the question is, how much community violence is attributable to mental illness? Anybody want to throw out a percent? 20%. Okay, that's a good guess. And so before I go on to answer the question, if you look to the media, you're going to expect high numbers. No question about it. But you have to decide whether you want to look to the media for your information or whether you want to look at studies. And I know there's a lot of skepticism about science, and that's legitimate skepticism, but you don't get a lot of choices in life. You get science and you get faith, and that's really it. You have to choose. So I'm going to choose science over what I see in the newspapers. And study after study shows that only a small fraction of community violence is attributable to mental illness. Now, 20% may sound small to some of you. To me, that sounds huge. And in fact, here's some of the studies after studies. Some of these studies are huge. This one on top, over 34,000 subjects were involved in this study from all walks of life. And then the next one, the Monahan study here, is probably the highest quality study we have on violence and mental illness, and that one's been cited a lot recently because of Newtown and other recent shootings. Very, very good high-quality studies with large numbers of subjects. So the actual answer is that 4% of violence originates with mental illness. That doesn't mean that people with mental illness, it doesn't mean that, it means 4% of violence is attributable to mental illness. There are lots of people who have a mental illness who are committing violent acts, just like there are lots of people with high blood pressure and diabetes who are committing violent acts, but in those cases, the violence is no more attributable to their mental illness than it is to their diabetes or their high blood pressure. So 4% of community violence it's actually 2 to 4%, and I'm erring on the side of giving a high number. It's a maximum of 4% of community violence is attributable to mental illness. So that just says the same thing. What about the other 96%? Where is that coming from? Well, I'm going to ask you guys. Anybody recognize these people? That's right. That's Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. And were they mentally ill? Did they go around killing people because they were mentally ill? No, they were robbing banks. They wanted money, and they killed people along the way. What about this guy? This is the outlaw Josie Wales. Is he mentally ill? You're telling me. Well, the outlaw Josie Wales wanted revenge, and that is a big reason for violence. What about this jerk? He's looks like a perpetrator of domestic violence here. Could he be mentally ill? Sure he could, but he could also just be a jerk. And you'd have to prove to me that he's doing this because of mental illness and not just because he's a jerk. I'm not going to make that assumption because most people that do this, that engage in this kind of violence in the family, are not going to be able to convince me or any other competent forensic psychiatrist that it's caused by their mental illness, even if they have one. What about these guys? Do they look mentally ill to you? They're drunk. They're having a drunken brawl. Very common. So let me talk about types of violence toward others. So the one that's really maybe most interesting to everybody is psychotic violence, and that involves a loss of touch with reality. That's really what psychosis means at its core. And so, for example, someone who becomes paranoid and has a delusional belief they're being followed or persecuted might commit a violent act to protect themselves. I had a patient who boiled her babies because she believed that they had been possessed by Satan. And she really believed that, and she boiled them to defend herself. And she will never get out of a hospital now in another state. There's also imagined euthanasia. Some people become very depressed and they feel that life is hopeless and they kill their families because they want to save them the pain of living. They make that decision for everybody else. And that is a psychotic depression that can lead to that kind of violence. Now there's also impulsive violence caused by alcohol and drugs, because of course when you do alcohol and drugs, some drugs just make you aggressive. There's no question about that. Drugs like alcohol reduce your resistance to violent impulses, and we're all human, we're all animals, and we all have violent impulses. So you pour a little alcohol on top, and we're more likely to get in a fight. Road rage is interesting because the other thing that keeps us honest when we're not drinking is just social norms and the threat of incarceration or other social or legal sanctions. So, we're all going to behave ourselves in this room, but out in the parking lot, this guy over here tried to cut me off. And, if I hadn't skedaddled in here pretty quickly, he might have tried to beat me up. So road rage is a situation where people are out on the highway. There's nobody really watching. There's no sense of being watched. And so people get out of control very quickly. Now, antisocial violence, I've already touched on a little bit with the outlaw Josie Wales and Bonnie and Clyde. So antisocial violence refers to violence for material gain, robberies, burglaries, muggings. There's also violence for sexual gratification, rapes and sexual assaults. There's violence for revenge. There's violence for avoiding consequences, like, I'm going to knock off the witnesses, Joey sleeps with the fish, that kind of thing. And there's also violence for recreation that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And that's kind of a big one. That's a big source of confusion for the public when we talk about violence and mental illness, is people who kill and maim for fun. What I'm trying to draw here is a distinction between mad violence that's related to mental illness, and bad violence. And then character pathology kind of covers, it has a foot in both worlds, because it includes road rage, where if you're the kind of person who thinks that you own the road, and you believe you're better than everybody else, you feel entitled, and then somebody cuts you off. Well, who are you to cut me off? Who are they to tell me that I'm not top dog? And so that incites a rage reaction. We see it a lot in young people. We see it a lot in people who have personality disorders, character pathology, and we call it the narcissistic injury. Another kind of narcissistic injury can be thought of as something that happens to you that upsets your view of yourself in a negative way. So if I were standing up here and feeling confident about my presentation, and then suddenly I realized I have a huge ugly stain on my tie, which I don't, that would be a narcissistic injury. So if I'm the right kind of person, that could make me really mad. And another way that we see in the news narcissistic injuries affecting violence is sometimes we'll have a recession, and a man who is trying to live up to society's manly expectations gets laid off from his job. He's too ashamed to tell his wife. He fakes it for a while. He gets up in the morning, puts on his suit. He tells everyone he's going to work, but he's really just sitting in the park thinking. After a while, bills start piling up. Mortgage is overdue. A foreclosure notice comes, and the next thing you know, the whole family is dead, and so is the guy who lost his job. He was so ashamed that rather than admit his failure, he just decided to kill everybody, and that's kind of the ultimate narcissistic kind of a murder. Probably not something that would provide a legal excuse for someone. That person would likely still be convicted of murder if he survived his suicide. So, here's a good question. How much violence could we prevent by taking guns out of the hands of the mentally ill? No one wants to venture a guess. 4%. Well, 4% is a good guess. It's actually a lot less, because the vast majority of the violence that's committed in the world doesn't involve guns, right? A lot of it does, and what you read about does, and certainly guns contribute a lot to violence, and you can't have a mass shooting without guns, no doubt about that. But it turns out that in 2010, almost 20,000 people killed themselves with a firearm. And in the same year, over 11,000 people used a firearm to kill someone else. Now, most of those people weren't mentally ill. Most of them were, the outlaw Josie Wales, or they're Bonnie and Clyde, people like that. Whereas of the almost 20,000 that killed themselves with a firearm, they were almost all mentally ill. And their suicide was directly attributable to their mental illness. So we can see that the statistic really shows firearms are extremely dangerous to people who have a high risk of suicide, because when they have a weak moment, they're feeling especially sad, they are intoxicated, they get a piece of bad news, and there's a gun right there in the desk drawer. They don't have time to recover, to step back, to sober up, to receive consolation from a friend or family member. They just reach for the gun, and bam, it's done before they have a chance to feel better. So that's really where most of the risk of firearms comes from as it pertains to mental illness. So this has been studied. and of the small fraction of community violence, that's the 4%, that's attributable to persons with mental illness, a maximum of 3% involves firearms. That doesn't mean 3/4 of 4%. That means 3% of 4%. So you crunch the numbers. That means for every 1,000 violent crimes, only 40 are attributable to mental illness. That's your 4%, and only 1 is committed using a firearm. So if you took the firearms away from everybody with mental illness, that's what you would get, is about 1 out of 1,000 violent firearm crimes that wouldn't get committed. And that's not a lot of mileage to get out of something that is likely to be very costly, both monetarily and in terms of stigmatizing the 30 to 35% of us who have a mental illness. Now, I want to talk a little bit about a theory that seems to be becoming more popular, and that is that every mass shooting over the last 20 years has one thing in common, and it's psychiatric drugs. This gentleman, who calls himself the Health Ranger, doesn't really offer any evidence for that position, but he shares the company of lots of media pundits who talk about psychiatric drugs causing people to snap and go off the deep end and commit violent crimes, and especially mass murders. Now, when you put a chemical into someone, you never know what it's going to do. You have a pretty good idea what it's going to do, and the longer the drug's been around and the more people have taken it, the better idea that you have. But the principle that any drug can cause any side effect applies in psychiatry as well as anywhere else. But to say that the drugs cause the violent crimes is just not supported by any evidence. So I have some evidence against it, starting with this guy, Edward Kehoe, who was he was a school district official in the town of Bath, Michigan in 1926. And he got mad at the mortgage holder on his farm because they were foreclosing. And so he killed his wife, burned the farm, put dynamite in the basement of this school, blew up the school, killed 38 kids in the explosion. Then he went out to his car, and he blew himself up in the car and killed 4 more adults along with him. So he killed 44 people. He was not on psychiatric medication. Now, if we go back a few years, this is from Los Angeles Times in 1905. This is an article about Thomas Lobb. Winds up, or 9 shot by maniac, winds up blowing his own crazy head off. And you can see that the kind of sensationalism in the media has not toned down terribly much over about 100 years. So this guy, he started throwing his furniture out the window of his San Francisco hotel room. And not surprisingly, a crowd gathered below. And when they did, he pulled out a shotgun and started blasting into the crowd. And he injured 9 people, and then he suicided. He was not taking psychiatric drugs. This guy, Daniel McNaughton, is very, very well known because he developed a delusional belief that he was being persecuted by a public official in England in 1843. And he believed that the public official was following him everywhere and that his minions were spying on him. And he went so far as to flee all the way to France, but they found him there. And finally, he'd had enough. And he came back to England, and he killed the official. The official's name was Drummond. And this man became famous because the standard for legal insanity that was used to acquit him and place him in a mental institution for the rest of his life became the standard that is used almost everywhere throughout Commonwealth countries in the United States today. It's the McNaughton standard. And some variation of it is in use just about everywhere in the English-speaking world. He was not taking psychiatric drugs. Now, of course, there are people who were taking psychiatric drugs and have real mental illnesses who are very well known and committed dramatically violent acts. So, anybody know who this is? Yeah, so it's Andrea Yates, who is from Texas, and she drowned her 5 children during a psychotic episode. And she was genuinely psychotic, had schizophrenia, and she was acquitted not guilty by reason of insanity, or whatever Texas's variation on that is. Anyone know who this is? This is John Hinckley, who tried to assassinate President Reagan. He was also found, the story behind him is really fascinating to read. He has schizophrenia. He had a lot of delusional beliefs about persecution by the Reagan administration, and he carried guns in his carry-on bags all over the country back in the day. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity, leading to a public outcry, and a lot of states got rid of their not guilty by reason of insanity statutes after he was acquitted. I think he's out now, but he was the real deal.
The Jodie Foster character. Wasn't he in love with Jodie Foster? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Yep, that's correct. Yep. How about this one? He's a local favorite. He's going to be in a movie. Yeah, this is Butcher Baker. That's exactly right. This is Robert Hansen, and he liked to go cruise nightclubs in Anchorage, pick up young women, and he killed around 20 of them. He would take them up in his Super Cub and land them in remote airstrips around south central Alaska, and then he would strip them naked and send them running off into the woods, give them a head start, and then he would hunt them down and kill them for sport. This man is not and was not psychotic. He was and is a psychopath. He's a person who has no conscience, not mentally ill. He just enjoys hurting and killing people. That's what he does. And he doesn't feel bad about it in the same way that some of you may collect stamps. He liked to collect murders. And no court in the world would find him not guilty by reason of insanity. And indeed, he is in Spring Creek right now, and he's going to stay there for about the next 450 years. How about this one? Some of the older audience members might remember. That's right. So this is John Wayne Gacy, also known as Pogo the Clown. And Pogo the Clown was a fine, upstanding businessman, and he was involved in all sorts of charities and public works. And one of the things he would do is dress up as a clown to raise money for charitable events. And he would go around and pose with public figures and say things like, a clown can get away with murder. And indeed, he was seducing and killing young men, raping and killing young men, and burying them in his basement. And the body count was probably around 30. It'll never be known for sure. And he tried to convince the court, when he was finally caught, that he was mentally ill, and that's why he'd done all these terrible things. And he faked the symptoms of mental illness, and the court didn't buy it, thankfully. And so he was convicted and put away for a very long time, and he won't be entertaining any more children. And by the way, not guilty by reason of insanity, when that verdict comes down, it is people like you who sit on juries who make that decision. So I always find it fascinating when people get really up in arms when defendants are released, are found not guilty by reason of insanity, and they think the system is terribly broken and something has to be fixed, and yet the very same people, you take them and put them in a jury box, and they'll find somebody not guilty by reason of insanity. So fascinating, a double standard, depending on your perspective, inside or outside the jury box. How about this one?
Oh, that's the Arizona fellow.
Right, that's exactly right. So this is Jared Lohner. Because he committed his crimes in Arizona, Arizona law, as I understand it, doesn't have not guilty by reason of insanity. Now, don't quote me on that, but what's interesting about him, in my mind, is he's clearly schizophrenic. There's no doubt about it. Nobody really disagrees about that on the prosecution or the defense side. Even the public agrees that he's mentally ill, of course, and yet he pleaded guilty, and he's going away for a long time. I mean, he was so mentally ill that he was found not competent to stand trial, and he was restored to competency using psychiatric medication, using antipsychotics, and yet he was not found not guilty by reason of insanity. He didn't even try. And then what about this dashing, athletic, outdoorsy-looking man? Who is this? Yeah, this is Israel Keys. And Israel Keys kidnapped Samantha Koenig and killed her, cut her up, left her in a shed frozen, and then he went on a cruise where he apparently enjoyed himself very much before he came back and disposed of her body. He did that or something similar to about 20 young women and a couple back out east somewhere. And to the best of our knowledge, he did that for fun. So let me ask you, was he mentally ill? So I'm hearing people say no and psychopath, and I think those are really good answers. The important thing to keep in mind, though, is that we don't know, and we will never know, because he killed himself before anybody could evaluate him. So we will never know. But he certainly bears all the signs. And I did not ever examine him psychiatrically, so I'm not going to diagnose him. But we know about him that he buried these kill kits in various places around the state. This is a Home Depot bucket that has a gun that's in there disassembled. Looks like it's got a silencer and a scope, and then he's got some cleaning supplies and some trash bags and a tarp and stuff that he could kind of swoop down and have that stuff at the ready if he found a suitable victim. So that shows premeditation. This is not a guy who's committing impulsive violence. He was thinking long and hard about it. So I want to talk briefly about mass killings. These are meticulously planned acts of revenge. Okay, so when you hear about theater shootings, school shootings, these are things that people think about for a long time before they do them. They're known sometimes as pseudo-commando mass murders. They're not anything new. These kinds of killings are mentioned in Greek mythology, and they go back a long, long way. The big question in a lot of people's minds is, are they increasing? And the answer is that we really don't know. It depends on who you ask and how you define a mass killing. This is a graph from Mother Jones that shows a pretty clearly increasing trend of mass murders. And these would be kind of revenge, suicide, mass murders followed by suicide, with Columbine and Virginia Tech and the Aurora Theater and Sandy Hook, and then of course Newtown is off the right side of the graph. But if you look at other sources of information that define a mass shooting differently, this is from James Allen Fox, who is a criminologist at Northwestern University, and his definition includes murders that are carried out while conducting other kinds of crimes, like robberies or drug deals gone bad. And when we look at the numbers defined that way, they don't really look like they're increasing. So I think that's really open to debate. What we do know is that mass shootings, though they seem common, in the context of a large population, they're pretty rare. And rare events statistically clump together. You know, you hear bad things happen in threes. That's not exactly right, but the truth of that statement, the kernel of truth in that statement is that rare events cluster together. So now, everybody wants to know, can violence be predicted?
No.
What if I start running at one of you with a knife right now? Can someone predict violence?
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely, of course. Now, that's easy. Anybody can do that. You don't have to be a psychiatrist. Things get a little bit more complicated when you're sitting calmly in the doctor's office. So the answer is yes, but with important limitations. And I put the dice, the faint image of the dice behind, because you're always playing the odds when you're trying to predict violence risk. First thing I want to say, psychiatrists do not have a crystal ball. It would be nice if we did, but we don't. And so we are going to be wrong a lot when we predict that someone with a low risk of violence will not commit violence. Some of them will. And when we look at somebody that has a high risk of violence, we say they have a high risk of violence. They might live to a healthy old age without ever hurting anybody. So no crystal ball. Basic principles of violence risk assessment. Everyone has some risk of violence. Okay, everybody in this room, pushed to their limits under the right circumstances, will commit a violent act. And there are lots of ways to quantify or qualify violence risk. Probably the most convenient way is to say it's low, moderate, or high. And when psychiatrists like me have to make decisions about whether to admit someone to the hospital involuntarily, which is a very kind of a terrible responsibility and an awful decision to have to make, we have to consider whether somebody's risk of violence is low, moderate, or high. And if it's low, well, there's no reason that you're going to take their rights away. If it's moderate, it depends. And if it's high, then you're probably going to have to take action. The accuracy of a prediction falls off very rapidly with time. So if I'm running at you with my knife, or let's use a different example. I'll take the blame off of me, and let's talk about bears. So if you have a bear coming at you, he's coming straight at you, just like they say in South Park. You know, if you're standing in this position relative to the bear, that this bear is likely to commit a violent act, highly likely to commit a violent act within about the next 2.5 seconds. Okay? Very easy to predict. But what if this turns out to be a bluff charge and the bear veers off into the brush and leaves you there panting and soaked in sweat, and you're there camped on the gravel bar? Is the bear going to come back? Well, we don't really know. You know, you look around, are there any cubs? You don't see anything. You hear any noise? Nope, nothing there. Probably sit up awake all night. You don't even go in your tent, and the bear doesn't come back. And by morning, maybe your pickup flight comes in, and you fly out, and you got lucky, the bear didn't come back. What about the next time somebody camps on that gravel bar? Is the bear going to come back? Well, now things are even more murky because we don't know. The farther out in the future you try to predict, the more difficult it is to know with certainty when someone is going to commit a violent act. So I encourage people to think about predicting violence the way that weather guessers predict the weather. And there are some parallels there. It's not exactly the same. Weather happens all the time everywhere, so you have a lot more data to work with. But if you think of violence risk in terms of climate instead of weather, it gets a little bit easier. People live in a climate of violence. Each individual has a climate of violence. So in the same way that it's pretty easy to throw a dart at a calendar and at any day and predict rain in Seattle, very easy because it rains there a lot. So somebody who commits a lot of violence or has a lot of violence risk factors, which I'll get to in a second, they live in a climate of high violence. If you go to the desert where it hardly ever rains and you throw a dart at the calendar, it's not very likely that it's going to rain on that day. It could, but it probably won't. So think climate, not weather. Now, professional risk assessments, there are three different kinds, three ways that mental health professionals predict violence. And the first is the clinical risk assessment. That is a polysyllabic way of saying a gut feeling. And that's why there's a picture of a gut in the background. It is notoriously unreliable. And unless the bear is coming straight for you, it's going to let you down. So unfortunately, it's still in common usage, but it's strongly discouraged. Now, the best way to predict violence is by using actuarial instruments. Things like the psychopathy checklist revised, the violence risk appraisal guide, the cover. These are the most accurate, but also the least practical ways of predicting violence. So the reason that they're the most accurate is because they work the same way that when you take out a life insurance policy, you got to check off all those little boxes. Well, there are actuarials. Those are people who sit in an office somewhere in a gigantic a building full of other actuarials, and they compare your check marks with everybody else's, and they figure out exactly what how likely it is that you're going to live for the 20-year term of your policy, and then they will decide on your premium or whether they're going to insure you. Well, that's the way actuarial instruments work in violence risk assessment. Unfortunately, they take a lot of time. They cost a lot of money. You would have to have 10 times as many psychiatrists as exist in the world to be able to do this with everybody, and you wouldn't want to do it. People aren't going to sit for this. The other thing is it's not reliable for suicide risk because suicide, although it's a terrible problem, is much rarer than violence. We're much more likely to get mugged than to commit suicide. Not to understate the risk of suicide, but violence toward others is a lot more common. So you can't use these to predict suicide, even though some people continue to try. This is just an excerpt from the Violence Risk Appraisal Guide, and it has some interesting things. Lived with both biological parents to age 16. Yes, you get -2, so your risk goes down, and no, your risk goes up. If you had problems in elementary school, the worse they were, the more your risk goes up. Interesting. Alcohol is on there. I think you can all guess what that does. I find it interesting here, if you look at the victim injury score, if you killed someone, your risk actually goes down compared to whether you just injured someone. I don't know why that is. I can only just guess that maybe people feel bad about it. They don't want to do it again. So that's the VRAG. The risk assessment method that is most commonly used by competent professionals is the structured risk assessment. And what that basically refers to is identifying, considering, and weighing the relative importance of risk factors for violence towards self and others, and also protective factors against violence towards self and others. And you put them on the scales there. There's the legal scales behind, and you balance them out. And depending on how the balance goes, that person is either going to be a low, moderate, or high risk. And I chose legal scales because if you do this poorly, if you do it wrong, you're likely to find yourself in court if you're a mental health professional that doesn't do this job well. So I'm going to briefly touch on some risk factors for violence. I'm right on time here. Risk factors can be thought of as non-dynamic or dynamic. Non-dynamic is the same as static, and what that basically means is they're historical things like being male or being in your late teens to early 20s. Now, of course, we know that's going to change as you get older, but when you go into the doctor's office, there's nothing the doctor can do to change that. If you have a below-average IQ, nothing to be done about it. Socioeconomic status can change, but it's mostly fixed in clinical settings. Instability in housing and employment. History of violence. History of violence. Can't change your history of violence. I have patients who say, oh, that was in the past, I'm all over that. No. You don't get to forget about your history because the past predicts the future. It doesn't lock you in to a track you can never get off of, but for prediction purposes, the past predicts the future. Property destruction, it is a short step from punching a wall to punching someone in the mouth. So property destruction is another evidence-based, non-dynamic risk factor. These are all evidence-based. These are all based on studies that identified these as risk factors for violence. Any diagnosis of mental illness, so there you go. That does increase your risk, some. Any personality disorder, and then, of course, substance use disorder is a big one. Now, as a mental health professional, things that I can actually fix, intoxication. You can come into the hospital and sober up. If you're in withdrawal, that makes people cranky. People that are jonesing are angry and irritable, and sometimes they'll lash out and hurt people. Well, we can medically supervise detoxification in the hospital or in another setting, and we can take that risk factor away, at least for the short term. Psychotic symptoms, including command hallucinations or delusional beliefs that you're being hunted, pursued, watched, persecuted, threatened, we can help with that by putting you in an environment that is safe, that feels safe, that is away from imagined persecutors. We can treat those symptoms with psychiatric drugs that are very, very effective. Same with paranoia. Physical agitation and verbal aggression. We have trained, experienced staff that can talk you down. De-escalate the situation. Access to weapons. Not taking away anybody's guns here. But I already talked about having a gun in the drawer as a risk factor. So I always recommend that if there's mental illness, put the guns in the care of a trusted friend or family member, because that risk factor goes away. It's easy to do. Anger, well, anger simmers down, and if you try to address the issues that led to the anger, that can reduce violence risk. Protective factors, if you want to think about protective factors, most of them are just the opposite of the, or the absence of the risk factors. And that's mostly all there is to that. There are other things. Having strong religious beliefs, not too strong, mind you, but having strong connection to your community, things like that are protective. But most protective factors are just the obverse of the risk factors. Now, coming up on the end here, severe mental illness, substance abuse or dependence, and history of violence. Those are the three things I want you to take with you. If you look at this graph, this is from a huge study with 34,000 people, more than that actually, and it shows that if you don't have A, B, or C, here's your risk of violence over a 2-year period. It's way below the base rate, which is about 3%. Everybody's got about a 3% risk. If you don't have severe mental illness, substance abuse or dependence, or a violence history, then you're going to be way below the base rate. If you have a severe mental illness alone, you're still going to be way below the base rate. And if you have substance abuse alone, you're going to be way below the base rate. But if you add, wait a minute. If you have a history of violence, then suddenly you shoot up to about twice the base rate. So there's your strongest predictor of violence right there. Strongest predictor of future violence is past violence. Not a surprise, I don't think. If you take mental illness and substance abuse, you put them together, you're still below the base rate. But if you add a history of violence, you shoot up another step. If you take a history of violence and add it to substance abuse, you shoot it up again. So interestingly, if you want to consider the relative risk of someone who has alcoholism versus someone who has major depression, which is the mental illness most likely to lead to violence, by the way, it's the one with alcohol dependence that is going to be most likely to commit a violent act if they've been violent before, all other things being equal. And then you add up all three of them and you've got a real problem, as you can see over here. So, summary, mental illness accounts for really a tiny fraction of community violence, 4%, not very much. People with mental illness are much more likely to be victims than perpetrators of mental illness. Among mentally ill individuals, suicides account for almost all gun violence, and substance abuse and a history of violence are the best predictors of future violence. And that's all I got. So I'll take questions.
I think that it is probable most mass shooters have some mental illness. It would be a stretch to say that they do. I think it would be hard to say that. I wouldn't attribute all mass shootings to mental illness. I would say that there is probably a contributing factor, but a causal factor is a lot harder to prove because there are usually lots and lots of factors.
Would you say there's a qualifying demonstrated with that?
Well, I have to tread carefully, okay, and I'll tell you that when you are, psychiatrists have to be careful about diagnosing people that they've never met, okay, that they've never evaluated clinically. When I read news reports from around the time of the killing and going on for about 10 years, the first 10 years or so, it's all about mental illness this, mental illness that, but then some reports started to come out that really, these kids were not on antidepressants. They may have been put on them a while back, but they weren't taking them. They didn't really have symptoms consistent with depression or anything else. And so there were a lot of contradictory reports, particularly in recent years. And so I think the short answer is I really don't know. When you see something like that, it's hard not to think mental illness played some role.
But there's an inherent bias there because some things are just so terrible that we believe somebody must be crazy in order to do that. And that's not true. People do terrible things without being crazy all the time. So I really don't know, and those guys are dead. I don't think we're ever going to know. A lot of questions. Right there, Jack.
Things like anger and so forth are learned. One can assume that they can be unlearned. And it's so much tied up with self. And you talk about material gain, sexual gratification, revenge, road rage. A lot of these things are involved with ego. We didn't deal with the sense of self, which seems to tie in with a lot of these things, like road rage and who am I want more, and therefore I'm entitled to take it, and those kinds of sexual gratification. Could you say just a little something about that, like how do we, in your article in the paper, you talk about the need to set limits, self-limiting, whatever term you use. And can you say something about that?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about the narcissistic injury leading to things like road rage and some certain kinds of mass murders. Most of these mass shooters have experienced a narcissistic injury. One of the narcissistic injuries that gets talked about a lot in the media is, legitimately so, is bullying. So that's a narcissistic injury, and that speaks directly to your concept of ego. Ego is your sense of self, and the more inflated and delicate your sense of self is, the tiniest pinprick can lead you into a blind rage. Whether that is legitimately diagnosable mental illness, I think, is another question. It can be, and it can be a contributing factor, but when I have a patient with a problem, an anger management problem, if you will, medications are not going to help with that. Therapy might help with that, but what I'd really like them to do is go to anger management. That's evidence-based. That works. Hard to get people to do it. It's 36 weeks of several hours a week, and it costs a lot of money. They have to pay out of pocket money to do it. But that's kind of the solution in my mind, and I think it is a big problem. I think part of American culture is that we like to think of ourselves as very strong and independent people. So we have big egos. We're a country with a big ego. And people who live here have big egos. And some of them are not based on a whole lot of facts. So it's easy to prick them with a pen, and then you get a lot of road rage and shootings. Yes?
Today's news reported that the majority of suicides in the military, are not due to combat or repeated combat, but to alcohol and drugs. Do you feel comfortable with that?
So the question is, do I feel comfortable with a recent report that most of the suicides in the military are not due to combat exposure, but due to alcohol and drugs? I think it sounds like there are two explanations being offered. One is combat exposure, which suggests maybe PTSD or other anxiety or depression. And the other is substance abuse. Of course, I talked a lot about substance abuse. I don't think we can legitimately choose between those two explanations. I think we have to consider them together as causal factors, and we have to approach them together as problems that need to be addressed on a population level, and as problems that need to be treated from a medical or behavioral health perspective on the individual level. But I don't think we can just say it's due to alcohol and drugs alone, because that problem is less prevalent in the general population, even though people use more substances in the general population as well. Yes?
I had a question, well, actually, two questions. Like, one question, you said something about major depression is actually most connected to violence, which seems sort of counterintuitive, since that's not usually associated with sort of a break of reality. Another question was, like, there's been some cases, like, I think about the shooter who attacked people in the theater, when it seemed like there was a breakdown in the whole process of the psychiatrist or house reporting that there was a problem, and then there's no follow-up on that.
Yeah, so the first question, I'll address the second question first. So the theater shooting is pretty interesting because I have access to information that is less publicly known. And what happened behind the scenes in that shooting is that the defendant's psychiatrist was very, very concerned about his violence risk and reported it to the university or the university police. And what ended up happening was nothing, because the police, under the laws of the state of Colorado, didn't have sufficient cause to do anything. And so the psychiatrist did what she could under the law, according to her professional judgment, to try to stop this from happening, but there isn't really a lot. I mean, in the same way that psychiatrists don't have a crystal ball, we also can't snap our fingers and just make the legal and social apparatus kind of swoop down and take care of people that we think are really high risk. We have to really go to great lengths. In an outpatient setting, it's very, very difficult to do. You can send someone to the hospital for an evaluation, but if they don't meet strict commitment criteria, they can't be admitted for treatment against their will. And if they are admitted for treatment against their will, depending on the state, then the professionals that are offering or rendering treatment only have a few days to try to fix a problem that has been decades in the making for that individual. And they have very limited means to do so. So oftentimes what gets reported in the media, and certainly in this case, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the lawsuit against the psychiatrist turns out. Certainly her career is ruined. But based on what I know, she did everything that I would have done under the circumstances. She did everything she could do short of stepping outside her professional role and tackling the guy and not letting him go home. In which case, she still would have done the same thing while she was in jail with assault charge. So it's really hard to manage these risks because we have to balance civil rights with public safety, and civil rights are really important. So we have a limited ability to kind of address this problem. I'm sorry, could you repeat your first question?
You said that violence is most connected with major depression, and that seems sort of counterintuitive.
Oh yeah, so that's been studied, and the diagnosis that is most closely associated with violence is major depression. Part of that usually is because people who, in extreme cases, people who are depressed do become psychotic and believe that they're, for example, they can imagine that they need to euthanize their families. That can happen. That's very, very rare. That accounts for just a very small part of the depression-related violence. What happens, though, is that people who are depressed drink more alcohol. They use more drugs. They're more irritable. They feel like they have nothing to lose. So they're just more likely to commit violent acts. Now, after depression comes bipolar disorder, and that one is not surprising. I think people who are manic can also be very, very irritable and physically agitated. And a distant third is schizophrenia, and I think that's the one that most members of the public are afraid of, because people with schizophrenia are psychotic and they're not affected with reality. But in fact, they're much less dangerous, all other things being equal, in substance abuse and all that. They're actually less likely to commit a violent act or others during someone's depression. I agree with you, though. It's counterintuitive. Yes?
Have there been any cases where there's been an attempt to use neuroimaging studies of structure or function to say that an individual is likely to be callous and unemotional?
Yeah, the question was, have there been neuroimaging studies that would enable us better to predict people who are likely to commit a violent act? For example, you could do an echocardiogram and predict who's likely to suffer from heart failure. Could you do a brain scan and predict who is going to be more likely to commit a violent act? And the answer is that there is some early research going on in that direction, but nothing that would be helpful clinically. Some of it is getting used in court, and courts vary on how much weight they give to that evidence because it falls outside of the evidentiary standard that says that you really need to be presenting evidence that is part of mainstream science, or at least a large offshoot from mainstream science. It hasn't gotten that far yet. I'm not sure it ever will, and I'm not sure that I want it to, because I wouldn't want to have everyone's head scanned and then shunt them into a different kind of life based on what their purported risk is. I always think of phrenology, the science of studying the motes of people's heads to find out what kind of people they are. I always think of phrenology when I hear about the imaging study. They're getting used more frequently by defendants who try to use them to convince courts that they have a neurologic anomaly that should excuse them from whatever ruling they have to perform. I'm very skeptical of that, but it is going on to a very limited extent in courts and in research communities. Yes?
Quite a while ago, say the 1930s or so, other states had state institutions, insane asylums, and then with drugs and everything, it seemed to me that all of them were could be safe to let out on the street. And for example, last year we used to have Morningside down in Anchorage. That's not important in Oregon. And do you have any comment on changes, government regulation of mental illness over the past 50, 60 years?
Yeah, I won't try to repeat the whole question, but the gist of it is, can I comment on deinstitutionalization? Deinstitutionalization is what happened during the 80s through the early 90s, where chronically severely mentally ill people who used to live their whole lives in mental institutions were kind of let out to be free and live in the community, and that coincided with. It was a little bit later than what you said. It was really more. It started in the 80s, and it was an outgrowth of two things. It was an outgrowth of the invention of phenothiazines back 20, 30 years earlier, which are the first antipsychotic drugs, and also lithium, which has actually been used for a lot, probably since prehistoric times for people who are manic, but it came into common usage in Western medicine in the 1960s. And so those two things were so effective that they did allow many people to exit institutions. The other thing that happened was the civil rights movement and related social phenomena that favored giving people more rights, more freedom, more dignity. And those two things led to most of those institutions being closed and the remaining ones being downsized and really converted into places where most people don't spend more than a week or two. It has upsides and it has downsides. The upside is people have more freedom and more dignity. The downside is that people don't have very good care. I think everybody knows that the mental health care system is in shambles. I'm not sure that putting people back into institutions is the best way to fix that problem, but I think we do need to fix it. Yes?
I've just heard a lot about background reporters topic. What is the actual mental illness?
Yeah, some people think it should be its own clinical entity. Some people think it should be kind of a subcategory of. Oh, sorry. So the question was Hoarders. What's the diagnostic construct that's hoarding? And so some people think that it should be its own diagnostic construct. Other people think that it's really a variation of obsessive compulsive disorder. Treatment's the same either way. Yes, sir.
Is there any studies have been done in coordinating or bullying with mental illness?
There have. I don't know the literature well. So the question is, have there been studies on the effect of bullying on mental illness? And I guess what you mean is whether it causes mental illness. Is that
well, either that or the individuals who are the bullies. it seems to me like they work themselves into jobs that, like police officers and stuff, bullies.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. There are a few things that haven't been studied, and I think that if you scoured the internet, you might be able to find some legitimate scientific research in that area. It wouldn't surprise me at all. I think, again, going back to gut feelings and kind of perceptions, certainly it seems intuitive that people who like power and control would gravitate toward jobs that would offer them that. And abuses occur everywhere, though. They don't just occur in law enforcement or professions. Yes.
You had one of your slides that history of violence.
Yes.
Characteristics of the person. Do you consider having a history of violence if they were in service as a sniper or door gunner, frontline combat soldiers, and what would the difference be between that and the violence that drops napalm on the village?
Well, I think if you ask 10 people, you might get 10 different kinds of answers. The question is, when looking at history of violence as a risk factor for future violence, would you consider military violence as a risk factor? And the answer is no. Military training itself is a risk factor for violence, but military socially sanctioned violence in the context of war is not in itself a risk factor for community violence. If you have someone who has that experience and also has a mental illness like PTSD and alcohol use disorder, then certainly you're going to have risk. But military violence itself is not a risk factor. And then the second part of the question had to do with distinguishing a military sniper from someone who drops napalm. And I think the idea that you're getting at is that someone who drops napalm or drops a bomb, they don't see their victims, they're not looking at them intimately through a scope. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question. I also don't know how you could look through the scope and pull a trigger on a human being, but clearly that's done all the time. Yes, in fact.
If the defense and prosecution both hire psychiatrists who look at the same facts, how should we
So the question is, in a criminal legal proceeding, if the prosecution and the defense both retain psychiatric experts who have differing opinions, which is the usual course of events in the media, it's less usual in actual practice, then how should we, and I think you mean the general public, how should the general public view that? I think you have to reason to your own conclusions. The context is that most insanity acquittals, which mean most cases in which a defendant pleads not guilty by reason of insanity and actually is released from custody and adjudicated not guilty by reason of insanity. Those are usually happen. First of all, they're very rare. They're rarely attempted. And only about a tenth of them succeed. When they succeed, they're almost always because the prosecution and the defense both agree, yeah, this guy was absolutely acting under the influence of a delusion or what have you. So that's part of the context. The other part of the context is that you can always find. I used to work for lawyers, and I remember one would always say, you can always find an expert who will tell you the moon's made of green cheese. And I really, years and lots of experience later, I really believe that you can always find an expert who will say what you want to say. There are some experts who, ideally you hire an expert and they come in unbiased and they take a retainer and they look at the files and then they start to form an opinion and then they come back and they say, you know what, I don't think I can help you here, or you know what, I think you have a really good case, I'll take it. But in reality, there are some people who always testify for the defense, and there are some people who always testify for prosecution, and you can find someone to say whatever you want. It's really ultimately it's up to the judge and jury to decide who they're going to believe. That's exactly what you do. Yes?
Do you have any comment on the drugs that are given to young children today at school because they wiggle around, which seems to be a normal thing for this to do? But will this have any effect later on, or do you know, or has anybody figured this out?
Well, the question is, can I comment on I think what you're referring to is ADHD medication for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder for children. I have mixed feelings about it. I'll tell you my clinical evolution. I'm not a child psychiatrist, for one. But my clinical evolution has been, first I thought it was terrible, that we need to show the kids less television and restructure schools to accommodate normal childhood behavior. But then when I actually started having to take care of some of these kids, they're totally out of control. They've got brothers and sisters that are not totally out of control. They've got parents that are totally reasonable, and they're disrupting the whole class, and they're at risk of flunking out of school, getting into drugs, getting into juvenile justice problems, and ending up on non-violence slides. So even though I still think we could throw away our televisions and restructure schools, I can't do those things. The only thing that I can do, the only things that I can do are the kinds of things that I talked about here, and that involves the prescription of medications. And the medications for ADHD are very effective, and they're pretty safe. I mean, they're not new. They've been around for 40, 50 years, the frontline stimulant treatments. I'm not saying that it's totally okay. I have mixed feelings about it. Yes?
So, would you say that mental health or mental illness runs in families? Like the parents are subject to depression, is it likely that if they have children that they will suffer some kind of depression?
Yeah, it's pretty clear that mental illness is transmitted in families both through the family culture, but also via adoption studies. We know that there's a very strong genetic component as well.
So does it hit and miss some of the things?
Yes. Yeah, it's hit and miss, and what you really get, what you get when you have a family member with mental illness is you get a risk, and then a kind of a genetic predisposition, and then depending on what other things go on in your life, you may or may not be healthy illness.
I have to wrap it up. I bet you'll take some questions here, but because summer session is videotaping, and you'll be able to watch this next week. By next week, it should be up online at Summer Sessions on the web. But I want to thank Dr. Sonkiss for coming in and talking with us, and I'm sure he'll take some questions after. But thank you. Thank you.
I'm happy to take questions for anyone who wants to stay and talk a little bit. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Alaska has a mental health trust fund.
Yes.
How well funded is it in the mental health of Alaska relative to other states? Does that fund help? It goes a lot of profit in it.
It helps, but it's not enough. It's not enough.
Why is it hard to get psychiatrists?
It's cold and dark. Yes.
You mentioned genetic predisposition. You mentioned a lot of environmental factors. Certain studies genetic linkages to specific genes, such as like the warrior gene or other maladies, time cultures that increase your lifetime risk for violence.
Yeah, so the question is there a single gene explanation for mental illnesses or violence risk? And the answer is so far no, and it doesn't look very promising. It looks like for any given mental illness or any given behavior or constellation of behaviors, there are going to be lots and lots of genetic factors that play a role. Yes?
You're lost in the jargon sometimes. Psychopath. If you're a psychopath, you're not going to be able to.
Yeah, so the question is, if you're a psychopath, you're not mentally ill. I think it's a circular definition to say that a psychopath is mentally ill. I think a psychopath is someone without a conscience who likes to hurt and kill people for fun, or just does it on the way to something else like money, power, and fame, and doesn't really care about you, about the people that he or she hurts. Since that's not something that I can treat, and it's not something that anybody can treat, I don't think it's a mental illness. I also think that one way of defining mental illnesses is by saying this is a set of behaviors that's never adaptive in any situation, but